let me make sure I record it for those who can't be here. All right, so tonight we're framing our lens. Your students, your children, hear me talk about the word syntropy a lot, and we're going to take a deep dive into syntropy tonight, so that you guys really get inside of what we're doing at Soul to Soil, what we're doing with the students, and why I feel it's relevant. Because who cares about this word? Why do I mention it so much? I know it probably sounds good. I mention it at picnics, and those of you who've been with us for a while, you at least have a background with it. But the reason why I want to bring it here tonight is to introduce it to you in a way where you can now take it on and run with it and see where it's relevant in your life and how it can influence the way that you see things that happen. Not certainly not because I'm trying to project anything or have you guys believing anything. The more you learn about me, the more you'll realize that I'm actually not ever trying to project my beliefs on anyone. It's just when I learned of this natural lens, a lot became clear for me in my life, and it was so connected to nature, which I was simultaneously learning about at the time. It just gave me this sense of calm and trust that I wasn't being indoctrinated by something that I couldn't validate in my own experience. And that has been a really big theme in my life. I don't know how many of you guys, please drop in the chat if you've ever felt that way, that sometimes in this world you feel like you're just told to believe things, and some of them feel good, some of them don't. And the idea of being able to verify something with your own experience actually feels a whole lot better. So everything that I tell you will be able to be validated in your own experience, and I encourage you to do that. All right, so let's give a context. What is syntropy? Syntropy is the operating system of life. Basically, it represents how nature works. In understanding syntropy, I feel it's important to consider that with any, human mind, what we observe is filtered through a lens that has been manipulated by past experience and programming. And that's a really charged word. I'm kind of fired up tonight, so I'm going to use really charged words if that's okay with you guys. But I'm specifically using manipulated with purpose. But basically, what we see is not necessarily ours, right? We are looking at life through a whole bunch of opinions and a whole bunch of facts that were told to us. And most of that programming happened before we even turned 7 years old. And then we walked life, and then we created in life. And what you guys will see is all of those beliefs that were not necessarily ours, that were absorbed by us, they create and they have influence. So, to look through Syntropy's lens necessitates recognizing and acquainting oneself with the beliefs and entanglements of past programming in order to separate and break free from those beliefs that don't serve your best interest. So, if I start to notice things that I'm thinking and I start to really learn how to be objective to the extent that is possible. And when we discuss quantum mechanics a little bit later, we'll talk about how I don't know that there is such a thing as objectivity when it comes to observation. But when I start to look at things and I'm like, what do I believe here? What's going on here? Something doesn't feel good. And I start to look at my beliefs, I can actually get into a place where I can break free from some of the things that are not serving me. So, um, so basically, in the most objective sense possible, I want to look at everything that happens, everything that is, in a way that aligns with unconditional love. That's the choice at Soul to Soil in my life, and what I'm going to invite you guys to, if you haven't already considered this, using unconditional love as kind of the North Star of your life, which unconditional love meaning wholeness, not like hearts and rainbows and romantic love. All different colors and aspects of love are wonderful, right? But when I'm talking about love, I mean wholeness and oneness. And looking at those beliefs and past programming with personal and conscious choice. Because how great does life feel if we are not free to choose our experience and then, in effect, what happens in it? And having been programmed and continually being programmed, because that's just everything that we take in and consume without conscious choice is a program. It's like an installed computer software. Well, we're going to be running on someone else's design. So that then choice and personal freedom don't really have a place in that. And this all may sound like common sense, but I can tell you from sitting with people as a life coach for like 18 years, it's not. That what I've noticed is that these ideas are foreign to almost every single human on earth, myself included. And that, we have a lot of experiences and relationships that have entangled us in these conventional beliefs that align with incoherent energies. And we've been taught and trained to accept those as reality. One of the major reasons why I pulled my kids out of school. This was not in my awareness. And then when I became aware, I thought, all right, well, I'm going to be a little more picky with the programming that we as a family take in. And when I started to take on this idea that there was a purpose and meaning in all of the challenges I encountered to help me own, or help with my disconnection with choice and with my will, then I looked at challenges differently. I looked at them as actually experiences that could be teachers. So if you can imagine that unconditional love represents balance, coherence, if you're thinking in terms of like wave patterns, so like brain wave patterns as an example. Unconditional love is the energy that I believe we're meant to feel and operate from. And Syntropy guides us to the how of operating within a paradigm or way of living that orients to love as the North Star. So Syntropy is kind of like the way you do it. And in our society, we have different North Stars, and usually they're fragments of life. And I'm not here to make them good or bad, but they'll sound perhaps familiar to you guys. Money, industry, yield or output, scarcity, fear, security, prevention, judgment, resentment, fight or war, separateness, competition, and even death. These are motivating ideas that our whole society and many of the tenets that we operate and the beliefs that we operate with, this is actually what is, these concepts are the North Star of a lot of these programs. And I don't know that many of us really acknowledge that, right? Because I don't think we would choose to orient our lives towards any of those things. So now, in a syntropic paradigm, a syntropic lens or way of looking at life, we are oriented towards love. There's faith and surrender, cooperation, acceptance, joy, fulfillment, abundance, and prosperity. And I know that sounds super like Pollyanna and optimistic and, positivism, but it really is a scientifically established way of looking at things that the good news is super positive, right? So that if you're an optimist, you're in a really great place. So in Syntropy, there's power and practice. There's heart and brain. There's energy and mechanics or movement. There's nature and nurture. There's inner and outer, self and environment, source and surroundings, God and earth, father and mother, positive and negative. And I mention these not as opposites, but creative forces that work together in life. So in Syntropy, there really isn't good or bad. There's just forces that create. So Syntropy is the wisdom from source, whatever you call it, whatever your beliefs are aligned with. Syntropy is this wisdom from source, and entropy is the misperception of outer surroundings. So entropy is the opposite of syntropy, and it's one of the laws of physics in our classical physics, a scientific paradigm I'll talk about a little bit later that really doesn't have any relevance, but is still taught in our schools. Like that's what we most learn. We learn classical physics. It doesn't really make sense anymore based on like a wide breadth of and body of science and knowledge now, and experimentation and repeated experimentation, reproducible observations. Classical physics doesn't make any sense, but we still believe it. And of course, our society is wired to it. And you guys will recognize where this becomes relevant without having to dive into physics. So, and then one of the most important things that my husband Gary loves to talk about, he's super fascinated with the brain and brain function. And when we think about syntropy, we don't look at the brain as a generator of ideas, as like the boss. We talked about it in the play. The brain is kind of the boss of the body, the play we did in the spring, but it's not necessarily, it's not on the level of source. It's a thinking organ, it's a receiver, and it's a perceiver. So, and then not just the thinking organ in the skull, but like the brain, and as in the membrane all over the body, that is not source. That is though where this interchange happens of perspective. So inner and outer environment, they interchange at the brain or the membrane, and our beliefs shift what goes in and out of that membrane makeup, that perspective makeup. Okay. So that was a lot. Tell me in the chat, just pop up a thought, anything that comes to mind so far. All right, just so I know you guys are alive and engaged. Okay. And then I just wanted to give a pop culture reference because, those of you who know me, that's kind of my thing. So, like, how many of you guys have seen the movie Trolls? Just do a little wave. I can see you. I'm looking at you. Anybody seen it? Okay. I really love that movie. So if you've seen Trolls, Syntropy would be the trolls, especially the queen, the princess of the trolls, Poppy. She's super positive, and the trolls live in this beautiful forest, and they co-create together, and they have dance parties, and they're hard workers, but they create magic. And they are interacting with the opposite, which would be the entropic entity in the movie, the Bergens. So there's this place called Bergentown, and everybody's really down. And there's this belief in Bergentown that you have to eat a troll on this one day of the year. You get to experience happiness, but you have to eat a troll. So that would be entropy. Okay, those are the kinds of ideas that come when we look at life through this scattered, separate, non-unconditional lens. Okay, so I'm just gonna pop in the chat. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen and see if you guys can see it. Where is it actually? Screen share. Hang on, you guys. Hang with me for a second. Here it is. Okay. Gary, I'm having trouble seeing the chat. So just if anyone can't see my screen,
it's all good.
What?
It's all good. You're good.
Okay, you can see it. Okay, great. All right, cool. All right, so let's dive in. So I'm going to do this quick, and then I want to hear from you guys about some of these points. So today, class 1, we're really laying down this lens, and we're going to go deeper into why we should care about it, because ultimately, the more I learned this, about nature, the more I realized how disconnected I have been from nature and how disconnected my life is. And I'm in this constant process of bringing the relevance of what I see out in natural systems into my like everyday suburban life. So that's my intention today, to share this perspective with you in such a detailed way that you guys can apply it right away and share your insights. So for those of you who saw my presentation on the Soul to Soil program, you've seen this slide before. I go into the definition of what is nature. And just so you know, I pull very colloquial, like just basic Google definitions. I do that with purpose. I used to really be kind of a snob about Googling. I really didn't appreciate the what is prioritized in a Google search. So I'm not somebody, that's not usually my preferred method of research unless I'm being really specific about the question. So those of you guys who've studied from me in homeopathy know I tell you how to like hack Google if you're trying to get health answers. But for these purposes, it's so great because I look at Google as like it's like human consciousness. It's like the popular belief, and you're getting to search what the agreed upon beliefs are, not just what like the technocrats want us to think about things, but also what we've actually agreed to that they've put forth by way of definitions. So this is one that always is a little shocking to look at and to review. What is nature? The phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscape, and other features and products of Earth, as opposed to humans or human creations. So if you guys notice, as I underlined, we are separate from nature, according to the colloquial definition, Oxford Dictionary's definition. Now, there are some problems with this, right? Because this may be something that you guys have experienced, even bringing your kids to a nature program like Soul to Soil. Lauren and Marguerite and I have had naturalists even in the program who spend lots of time in nature, who reflect beliefs that are entropic and that actually really do reflect a separateness from nature. But this is kind of a problem, right? Because I don't know about you guys, but I believe we're part of nature. And that's my goal, to live more in harmony with it and learn from it. But we've written ourselves out of the definition. So clearly that is not, that is one of those disharmonic parts of our society that is something that creates. So what is nature? So next, what is a paradigm? So this definition is very interesting to me, not my favorite, and I really want to put it out there so you guys can see one of the problems, I think, especially in our scientific way of observing things and the way that we come up with conclusions. But this is one of the main definitions of a paradigm. In science and philosophy, a paradigm is a distinct set of concepts or thought patterns, including theories, research methods, postulates, and standards for what constitutes legitimate contributions to a field. All right, so we have thought patterns, we have theories, we have research methods, postulates, and standards, okay? None of these are natural laws, right? All of these are based on opinions. I mean, since when is a theory an objective truth? And I come from a research background. That's my master's degree was all about research. So I just find it interesting that we're basically saying in the definition of paradigm that your whole perspective on life is filtered through a set of agreements that you didn't necessarily create and that are going to influence what's told to you. So that in itself really bars the experience of living freely, doesn't it? If we're looking at everything in life through a paradigm that's defined by, I don't know how many of you guys participate in theoretical creation in our society or research, or developing postulates and standards. I don't know how many of us are stakeholders in those arenas. Then you're not really, your lens is not yours. So anything that's told to you, it's super important to realize that whatever is told to you is told through some kind of paradigm that has significant influence by someone other than you, your intuition, and clearly nature, because, well, humans are separate from nature. So nature is not included in our human paradigm currently. Now I like this definition better. Okay, I found this one on vocabulary.com. What is a paradigm? A paradigm is a standard perspective or set of ideas. A paradigm is a way of looking at something. When you change paradigms, you are changing how you think about something. So that brings us to this really beautiful quote that Gary reminded me I needed to bring into the presentation. You guys may have seen it before, Dr. Wayne Dyer. I don't know if he originally said it, but he's very famous for saying, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And now this is a scientifically proven concept, actually. I know it sounds good and it sounds like one of those really nice memes that you see on Instagram, but this actually is something that we know now about our life, that the way we look at our life actually influences what happens. And I'm going to touch upon quantum mechanics because it correlates with syntropy. In fact, syntropy and quantum mechanics are actually interchangeable terms. But I'm not going to do a deep dive in quantum physics. Number one, I am not a quantum physicist, so I think it would be to your detriment to learn specifically from me, although I am an enthusiast. I have studied a tremendous amount of it. This is worth looking into and beyond the timing that we have for tonight. But let's just look at it on a basic level. And I pulled from Google a colloquial understanding of quantum mechanics. So this isn't coming from something that might activate your doubt, like some kind of fringe science where, by the way, a lot of good stuff comes from fringe science. A lot of really helpful, in my opinion, legitimate stuff comes from fringe science. But just in case, this is a very colloquially accepted definition. Sorry, hang on. All right, so what is quantum mechanics? Quantum mechanics is the study of how particles at the atomic and subatomic level interact with each other and their environment. The observer effect is a phenomenon in which the act of observation alters the behavior of the particles being observed. This effect is due to the wave-like nature of matter, which means that the particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously. When an observer measures a particular property of a particle, and this is important, we teach this to your kids at Soul to Soil, that once we measure something, now we create with it. They are effectively collapsing the wave function of that particle, causing it to assume a definite state. So now we can go into the double slit experiment and all these really, really cool experiments where this was tested and even discovered. But let's just take it to like the basic level. So quantum science that really kind of began in or around like Einstein's work. So physics really took a shift around the time of Einstein towards even actually prior to him. So the end of the 19th century, where there was more of like a Newtonian view, this cause and effect, right? Like the apple falls from the tree because gravity pulls it down, kind of thing. Quantum science was so different and it was so mind-blowing. It required different math equations. It required a totally different way of processing, and it was really a non-linear way of looking at life. Like life was reduced down. Science for many years prior to this discovery, although it was actually newer science, because all of human history has kind of followed this model of more of like a spiritual way of looking at life, this energy to matter approach versus energy or matter, which is what classical physics postulates. That this idea that life is this expression of waves, it's light and sound basically interacting. But what happens is completely dependent on an energy interfering with all of these wave potentialities. So if you imagine like life is just a whole bunch of like light and waves bouncing around, and then the minute a focused being or entity zeroes in on a time, place, point, and set of qualities or quantities, it collapses into a physical reality, and we call that particle. But particle and waves are not different. They're actually just the same thing. Particle is just focused. So actually, Gary, I wanted that that torus field toy that we have. I don't know if you can bring that up here. I was going to show you guys this really cool toy that I found that is just gives a little bit of an image of like what is going on in life before it collapses, because all we can see is like this, the physical stuff, right? Like the matter, the material part of it. But if you take any piece of us and you put it under a microscope and you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and keep zooming in, eventually you're just going to get to space. There's nothing but space in between these particles, in between cells. Even a cell, it's not actually just a physical entity. So I don't know how much that like, you know, crowds your brain. It was really mind-blowing for me when I first was trying to get a handle on that. But when we're talking about syntropy, we're talking about something that is not going to fit into this cause and effect Newtonian way that we're trained at looking at life. In many ways, quantum mechanics blows all that stuff out of the water. So, but the good news is it's still really understandable. You do not have to be this crazy, mathematician or physicist in order to understand it. And that's why I love syntropy, because it really gives us a practical way of looking at this stuff. So life and nature have a quantum mechanical operating system, and it is called syntropy. You guys hanging in there? Everybody still awake? I'm gonna get a little shake out and stretch. All right. So I find that teaching in opposites can be really helpful because, well, contrast is a really beautiful way to highlight the qualities of something, right? Contrasting colors, light and dark, right? Shadow gives such beautiful dimension to light beings, right? So studying syntropy and entropy together is a really helpful way, in my opinion, to understand syntropy. And we're going to go to syntropy first. So that cool thing, that toy I was going to show you, it looks like a torus field, and that's what you see here on the right. That this is kind of like how life happens, which is crazy. You kind of see source in the middle, right? This like amazing light, and then these patterns that are emerging out and kind of interacting. But every bit of it is organized. Every bit of it has some kind of a connection and collaborative pattern. So when we're talking about syntropy, these are the simplest, most basic concepts that we are all under the agreement to look at life through syntropy, that life is based in this concept of unconditional love. You could actually call unconditional love God, like the source energy, this incredible life force that creates, and that life is based on wholeness, right? So then all energy connects and can never be destroyed. Now, one commonality in classical physics is that we have these laws of thermodynamics, entropy being one of them. And one part of that is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it's only transferred. So there is no such thing as destruction when we actually see that all of this is energy, that what we actually perceive as destruction is just a result of our what we've created, kind of like the mess that we make when we forget these concepts that I'm going to share with you here. All right, so unconditional love. Then we have abundance. Okay, so here's where the optimism, positivism comes in, that when life is left to do its thing and when it's supported, then life is just full of more life. Life always wants to make more life. If you look at a forest system, it's just going to keep creating more and more. Most of what we see in our natural landscapes in Florida, especially, are not really that natural, and they're really reductionistic, right? They're super carved, and invasive species, which is a whole other meeting, are pulled out, and they're pruned into these shapes that are not forests love pruning, and that can actually lead to more abundance. But the way that we categorize invasive, native, all of these ways that we relate to plants in our landscapes actually create kind of scarcity and desertification. So we don't ever see abundance. We don't even know what a real forest looks like, because we just never let it go there. But if we were to let a forest do its thing, it's always going to create more consolidated life, like more matter, like energy stores and then creates more life. So more complexity gives rise to more stored energy, right? So with all of this mixing of beings, I just showed a pollinator, a bee and a flower, and that interaction. That's why we love pollinators, right? Because they just spread information everywhere. That's what they're doing. They're just spreading information from one flower to another, and they're mixing information and creating hybrids. Nature does that, right? Nature does its own genetic modification, but it's this abundance based creative force. So biodiversity, nature loves it. So one of the reasons why I think there you'll see phenomenon of like monoculture, like if you just grow one crop on a piece of land, the land does not do well. The soil completely dies, and eventually that space of land will become a desert. And at Soul to Soil, like with the kids, one of the ways we study history is not necessarily, I don't take them from every, Egypt to, and Rome and Greece, Rome, all of those different places per se. I talk about it thematically. So if you look at civilizations and why, when we go into entropy, you'll see this, why civilizations needed to constantly spread out and branch out was a lot, I think, in large part due to the fact that they kept way overusing the land and not working with nature. And like if you look at where the earliest civilizations were, right, in the Middle East and even in Africa, those places are totally desertified. It's kind of what's happening to Florida. So that's not what happens when a natural system is allowed to do its thing. So abundance is always possible, prosperity always possible, and then the energy of cooperation. And this one is a tough one because we live with this opposite energy. And when I go into entropy, I'll talk about it. But essentially, Syntropy says that life works best in collaborative systems, systems-based operations. So I don't know how many of you guys have looked into, there's like systems-based everything now. A lot of corporations work this way and they use all these systems-based theories, and they're incredibly effective, like systems-based biology, systems-based physics, systems-based economics. But when it's systems based, the North Star is on the whole ecosystem. It's not on one particular part. So a systems based operation and endeavor in nature would always have the whole in mind. It's never going to separate from the whole. And what's incredible is there's so much complexity to it. Nature is complex, it's not complicated. Humans complicate things because we fragment where our North Star is, right? We're not looking at the whole picture and always serving the whole's best interest. which, by the way, doesn't mean that just because we're serving the whole doesn't mean that everybody has to be the same. In fact, just the opposite, right? What did I say before? Abundance means more diversity. So it doesn't mean everybody does the same job and makes the same amount of money. And look at a beehive. Look at any of these hierarchical systems in nature, but they're symbiotic hierarchies. They're not like what we have found in human history in leadership, right? Where there's this, the promise perhaps of serving the whole, but on no level, I really can't think of many leaders who were truly symbiotic in the way, or political systems, or any government for that matter, that was set up in a symbiotic hierarchical way. So when I talk about how this class is about bringing these lessons from nature into our unnatural ways of living, I'm not trying to just badmouth the way that we're living, but that's what I mean by unnatural, that like we're not referencing nature. We can see in the Oxford Dictionary definition that we've separated ourselves from it. So that this, the way we've set up our society, I'm not just trying to badmouth things, I'm just trying to point out that it is unnatural, and most of our problems are self-created because of this separation, because we've separated ourselves. So cooperation, we don't even know what we could create. We don't even know how cool technology could look. It doesn't mean we all have to live on homesteads like Little House on the Prairie, right? So this is syntropy. And then finally, connection. Everything is interrelated and dependent and interdependent, so it performs a function with purpose. All right. Now, this, you guys will hear me say this over and over. The kids hear me say this over and over because this was one of the most helpful pieces for me. Just to give you a little bit of background, I started my life as really like hypochondriacal. I'm super fear-based, tons of anxiety. I still am dismantling a lot of those beliefs and taking myself out of the entanglements of the web that was woven for me and my programming, societally and otherwise. But this helped so much, because when stuff happens to me, instead of getting into the victim place or getting into the blame game or in the, oh my God, this disaster could happen, what am I going to do? I stay very centered in this natural perspective. Oh, everything performs a function with purpose. If I can stay with this, if I can walk through this, stay in my power, stay in my own accountability, I can learn from it. I can walk through this and actually transcend and do what nature does, which is evolving into more complexity, more stored energy, even more like, so aging, think about it from a syntropic perspective, makes no sense. It doesn't make sense that I'm just going to keep gassing out, becoming less, energetic, more wrinkled, more limited in my movement. But that's exactly what happens. We don't even know what old age can look like if we were living life syntropically. And that's why Kristen's not on this call, but she and I just did a podcast, and that's what we talked about. Like, these ideas of aging, they're ideas, so they create. So exactly what happens to us as we age, well, we are creating that right now, and we can deprogram it and program something else, but it just takes acquainting ourselves with another operating system, right? So let's go to the more familiar operating system. Okay, by the way, just check in. I'm checking in with you guys. How are you guys? Gary, should I take a little break to hear from anybody, or should I keep on going? I don't have a whole lot more. Okay, you guys good? Okay, all right. All right, so entropy. So you can see this picture on the right-hand side. Instead of a torus field, it's just this like scatter. And what's really cool about this, this video image, it reminds me of Dr. Masuri Emoto's work that we talk about with the children a lot. It's just one of those really beautiful ways to capture some of these concepts. So Dr. Masuri Emoto, for those of you who don't know, he was a Japanese molecular biologist, and he studied the properties of water. And his work was really interesting because, and there are actually people who've continued his work, which I am meaning to. It's on my list of things to dive into even more. But water, he discovered water has memory. The social behavior of water molecules when they are studied in conjunction are very different than what has been known about water up until now. Water is like one of those fields of science that became, it was almost like if you went into water, you were bullied, and it was just due to like rumors and just some like mockery that happened among scientists in that field. But so water wasn't really studied. We know a lot about the water molecule H2O, but we don't know a lot about water molecules and their social behavior. So one of the cool things that Dr. Emoto studied was the influence of emotions on water. And because the human body is made predominantly of water, he was looking to see and kind of make the point of the impact that our thoughts and beliefs and our communication exchange, what it's actually doing structurally in our bodies. So he would do all these experiments where he would put words like on a glass of water, and or he would speak to it, he would play certain types of music to it, and then he would freeze that water and look at it under a microscope. And these images that he captured were phenomenal. Like any of the loving words, thank you, I love you, playing really beautiful classical music, even taking samples from sacred water sites, or water that had been prayed over. He even did before and after tests of water that was like really dirty from like a city runoff and then was prayed over. And you saw incredible crystalline shapes that were formed, pictures of animals. It was just really beautiful work. It's worth looking into. Dr. Masuri Emoto, Emoto. Kristen, Essie's mom, actually studied with him, which I'm like so jealous when he was alive. So anyway, but the point is that when we look at the water under a microscope that had been exposed to words like hate and war, and like actually death metal music, it actually looked like this scattered separateness. And it was so beautiful. Marguerite Maeve one day said, she's like, oh, I see beauty in that too. And I loved that moment because there is beauty. There's beauty in everything. There's even beauty in disorder. And Syntropy will say that. It's not that entropy is bad, it's just separate. And it's not as symbiotic and amazing. And it's not going to be a creator of beauty the way that Syntropy is. So let's look at entropy and how familiar this sounds. So in entropy, we have separation, right? We forget that we all come from source, that we all come from God, whatever you want to call it, love. And there's this belief that life expands into randomness and disconnection. So that is the law of entropy. You'll hear this. Like the craziest thing to me is when I've heard this many times in schools when my kids were taught about the sun and space. They love to teach about sun and space to little ones. Before they learn a lot of other things, which puzzles me. But they teach about the sun and they'll say, I have books on it. The sun is, this many, millions of miles away and it's this big and it's going to, explode in, a few billion years or something. They're literally telling this to like 5-year-olds. You're reading this to like a 4-year-old. Oh, the sun's going to explode and everything's going to take everything with it. That's such an entropic thing. Who writes a children's book meant to educate little kids and just has to put that fact in there? Like, how exactly did that benefit kids living in the here and now to hear that? But those are the kinds of ideas that occur to us when we're looking through entropy's lens, right? Okay, sorry, I had to stand on my soapbox there for a second. Scarcity, okay? This doesn't exist in Syntropy, which is absolutely crazy. How much are we hearing about food shortages, gas shortages, brownouts? I mean, the way that we're living, it really just takes the flip of a switch and we're missing most of the things that we rely on a regular basis. I mean, just look at how we live. We're not in a state of empowerment or sovereignty when it comes to sustaining ourselves, right? So of course it's easy to flip on the scarcity switch, right? We are completely dependent as a society on resources that exist outside of us. So if, the belief in scarcity is if there's too many organisms, there won't be enough to go around. Resources will be depleted. We hear this all the time. This is why they're exploring Mars and all these other places where we can move when we use up the Earth, right? That is an entropic concept and it is by no means the truth. You'll hear things like farmers talking about extinction events within 60 to 80 years. They're doing that based on, they're projecting this. One of the markers for these, how many of you guys have heard that? Just pop in the chat if you heard this before, that we're like looking at a human extinction event as soon as 60 to 80 years from now. And this is not from like alarmist, like you can Google this, this is mainstream. But the two indicators are fertility. So there's like widespread infertility, and we can talk about the natural philosophies or theories regarding that. And then the other is that there's just not going to be enough water, that like reservoirs are draining. They're measuring waters in like the places where we get most of our crops in like the Midwest, and the aquifers are going to be out. So this is where civilizations, right? Like the empires were built. Oh, well, we used everything up here, so we better move. We got to move on to greener pastures. That's an entropic way of looking at things, right? When we're not living in harmony, then we're living in scarcity. And no beings behave well in scarcity. That's why you see this uptick in crime when you have this economic scenario like we're going through right now. Gary and I are always amused at looking at the Facebook threads in our neighborhood. But there were three burglars who were running through our neighborhood, and there were helicopters, circling the neighborhood, and that kind of stuff is scary. But like, it's just you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more crime. I don't know how many of you guys have lived. I grew up in New York, and I lived in New York City for 6 years. So and I lived in the Bronx and Queens and all different areas. I mean, when pressure is increased, you're going to see beings behave at their worst, right? So when scarcity is present, it is has a huge impact on what creates in our lives. So those scarcity beliefs are ones that I really highly recommend looking at and trying to cleanse yourself of so that you can step into abundance and actually invite that in. That's a huge one for me, and we can talk about a homeopathic approach to that, but I'm still dissolving so much of that, this poverty mindset. Then we have competition. This is where survival of the fittest comes: war, teams, nations, territories. I'm all for cheering for a team, and I love to be in the, United States, and I'm very, proud to be an American in a lot of respects. But like, it's one Earth, guys. Like, it's all attached. It's all connected, especially by water and air. So same thing in the body. Like, we have this specialization and kind of reductionistic approach where physicians are super, super expert in one little part of the body. And I've sat with physicians before where they don't even know how to talk to one another because they're so expert in one part. And meanwhile, like, if something gets into your body in one area, it's not just staying in that one area. It's your body as one ecosystem. It's going to connect. It's not like it's not segmented like that. That's another illusion or delusion of entropy, in my opinion. Okay, these are my opinions. Um, no connection to wholeness. I myself there, or ecology of the earth, and this is where you find greed and you find fear. Okay, this is how we end up in a greed driven society, because we have stories of competition. And I'm not talking about a fun sports team game, right? That's great. That is, and when we talk about soul to soil, when we play games and like winning is an opportunity to pursue your personal best. But if you like throw all your eggs in the winning basket, you miss out on the whole experience. I've seen this in my kids and their baseball teams. Like, there's just this constant focus on the win, and none of the kids are actually optimizing how they're playing. They're not actually trying to better themselves. They're just so fixated on whether they won or whether they lost. And it really just, the whole experience becomes, I feel like, a kind of low vibration, low quality experience. Now, there are other coaches who are all about this, like, just team spirit and working together and cooperation and symbiosis. If you get a win in that state, or if you play a really worthy competitor and you're really, fighting for that win, but not fighting from a competition standpoint, but from like almost like a cooperative, let's just all give our best to see who's the best. That's awesome. It's not like you can't do that. You can't compete, but competition from an entropic perspective is a totally different energy, and it's why we go to war. Then we have such light topics I'm bringing up tonight. Then we have the fear of death. Okay. So this is one that could be an entire discussion in itself. And I won't say that I have any expertise, and I would love to bring this in. I really actually want to hear tonight what you guys would like to discuss through these lenses, because I had a really terrible relationship with death my whole life, and I was kind of kept outside of it. And I've come to learn that that's really unusual, that when you look at various indigenous cultures or just various cultures throughout the world, there is a much more involved and balanced relationship with death that we kind of miss out on when we're so in constant awareness of it and avoidance of it. And the thing about, what did we say about the observer effect? Like, where focus goes, energy flows, and the whatever you focus on collapses into a reality. So you can't say to the universe, I don't want this to happen. I hope this does not happen. You're saying the thing. Your focus is going there. That's a measurable point of view, and you're actually more likely to invite something. I talk about the phenomenon of the telephone pole. So somebody gets into a spin out in their car, and usually the first thing. Most of us are not trained in what to do in a spin out. My dad was a police officer early in his career, and my older brothers, the way they taught me to drive was taking me in, like, when it was icy, in like a Long Island parking lot, and they would make me do like fishtails, and they would have me spin out so that I knew how to reconcile and redirect my car into where I was going. And I feel like that was one of the things I do best. I feel like as a driver is, in a compromised scenario, being able to stay calm and refocus. But that's not what that's not usually in driving school or in our way of teaching driving. So what ends up happening in a spin out is the brain goes into fear, right? You're paralyzed. You can't focus on the management center. Frontal lobe shuts down, and what most often happens is we focus on what we want to avoid. So a driver might focus on avoiding something like a telephone pole, and could avoid it somehow, but ends up, because the body will follow where the head goes, the focus goes to the telephone pole, and then the driver actually drives their way into the telephone pole. So when we have this constant, I need to avoid this disaster, this risk, this death, this disease, all of these fear stories that are constantly on the news and in our Twitter feeds or whatever it's called now, then where's your focus going? Right? This is why it's so important to be picky over the programming. So, and then this idea of power over force, which I won't get into because I'm going a little bit long, but those are different energies. So force, is always met with counterforce. So if I try to stop something, and by the way, one of the things that Soul to Soil has taught me, and spending time with your children has taught me, is that the word stop is one of the most ineffective words ever created. It's like a stop sign, like it's like an optional thing. Like kids will be getting into a thing, and one kid's having so much fun and just like going with the vibe and the energy, and the other kid is all of a sudden starting to not feel comfortable but still kind of in the fun, and they say stop. They say it a few times while they're laughing, and then all of a sudden it's a stop, stop, stop. I said stop. And it's not specific. It's almost like the focus is not in line with what that child actually wants. So what we do is we help them find language and access in a moment of where they're uncomfortable, to notice that earlier. Because a lot of times we get angry because we're mad that we didn't stop something earlier. We don't set the boundary earlier, and we don't set one in a specific way. We're not even aware of what's going on in our body and what we truly want. We're so caught up in the thing that's happening. So, and then it's so easy to then bring anger into it and make the other person an enemy, when that other kid was in a totally different experience. He or she was in their own experience. So sharing our experience, and then also, we're not trained to sense each other. We can communicate non-verbally, but we're not really trained to do that. It's, from the beginning, use your words, right? And that is important. Words are important, but there are other ways to communicate. So when we become more sensitive to, body language, and we're not in such an avoidance, fear-based, make sure this doesn't happen, no hands on others, don't do that, this is not what you do. Now we're so focused on what not to do, who knows what to do anymore? Who knows what to feel or sense? So these are some of the entropic ways of being that I might be totally like blowing you guys away, that like this is what's different in Soul to Soil. And I want to honor whatever might be uncomfortable in you, if there's anything uncomfortable that you're sensing here, because I know I come from this world too. So I know how uncommon it is to really separate from these ideas. Okay, hang on, I'm not able to get to the next slide. Where's my next slide? Okay, and then I'm going to wrap it up with, just a second. Come on, give me the next one. There we go. Okay, so let's all breathe for a second. And I want you to imagine that if you're speaking from a place of syntropy, if you are teaching yourself or your children a way to view the world, here are the choices when we're talking about syntropy versus entropy. And they're not opposites as much as they're just flip sides of a coin, right? If I'm facing love, syntropy is the way. If I'm facing away from love and I forget love, entropy is the way, the operating system. All right, so syntropy says, Nothing is random, even chaos is organized. Life moves towards abundance and harmony. I cooperate to co create plenty for all, more life density, more types and kinds of material life and ways of living. The possibilities are endless. And when conflicts are resolved, dreams come true. Okay, there's that one. Or there's entropy. Entropy says, I am at the effect of a random universe. Resources are scarce. I have to compete or sacrifice to have enough. I must focus on risks so as not to lose, fail, or die. Life has an end. What is best for most may not be best for all. The dark unknown is to be feared and avoided. You can never be too careful. So that would be the language of entropy. And then I'm not going to get into this too much tonight, but we'll mention this in another class. But these are 4 operating paradigms that I learned from this thought leader Carol Sanford. And I thought it was it's an interesting one to take in and learn. This is in my presentation also for Soul to Soil, the education program. But I just want to quickly introduce them so you guys can contemplate this, because we vacillate between these all the time. Like, we're in an extract value society. So a lot of what we engage in, there's this like, what's in it for me? And not from like a self-centered place, like an honoring of self, like I would love for this to nourish me. It's more of just like a way we've been trained, like, oh, this isn't worth it unless. Even with nature, like I see it, oh, well, go barefoot, go for a barefoot walk in the forest, not because you're being in a forest, you're being in nature, because you'll get the grounding and the negative electrons, with the barefoot touch of the earth. Or forest bathing will help you sleep. We need to hear the like, what's the benefit? And then I'll do it. Oh, I'll eat grain free or gluten free because, I'll be less bloated. Or, we need that, like, that value add in order to engage in something. So that's the extract value lens. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these, but again, these are partitioned. They're not of wholeness. They're gonna be missing something if you're just looking through that lens. Arrest disorder is that stop, right? The stop sign. Let's stop bad things from happening. Let's stop climate change. Nothing about saying I'm going to stop climate change helps me understand what is climate change. What does that mean for me, other than pictures of, ice caps melting and lonely polar bears? Or, does that make me care about nature? Does that make me, like, if I stop using plastic straws, does that really save turtles? Like, we went to the Loggerhead Marine Life Center, and I'm pretty sure I gave like the marine biologist a run for her money because I was just asking all these questions. Like, that isn't even the most frequent reason why turtles are coming in sick. But we focus on these things. They're like these big campaigns. And, my background, my master's degree is in public health. And what was so disheartening when I was graduating was just realizing, when I looked at the statistics, there were all these programs that were created, public service announcements and interventions and all these things, brilliant students designing these things and getting grants and all this stuff, but none of them worked. They weren't getting any results. They were terrible, the results. I mean, if you look at our health statistics, like the latest look, even our medical system is a leading cause of death. The healing system that's supposed to heal us, that's supposed to stop disease, actually is one of the leading causes of death. By some estimates, the number 1 leading cause of death. I mean, it's like insanity, right? Because we're trying to stop disease. We're trying to stop the fever. We're trying to stop you from catching measles. And when you look from a nature-based perspective, I mean, I could do you guys know my perspective on germs and bacteria. I mean, the level of misunderstanding and complete cognitive dissonance when it comes to some of this stuff comes from just the lens we've been taught. It's no one's fault. I'm not blaming medicine. I've been partnered with medicine for such a long time. I truly love healthcare. I love people who want to help people get healthy, nurses and doctors and all the incredible, beautiful, valiant people in that industry. But because of the lens, because of this like dogmatic way that we've looked at things, the way we've closed ourselves off and believed these entropic fear stories, or the way we float our focus, it's collapsing into particle states that are creating the thing that we keep trying to avoid. So that's the stop one. Do good is another one. How many people you know who just do everything for everybody else? Like when I first got into homeopathy, it was so difficult for me. I'm only just now, I've been doing it for 7 years. I'm only just now healing myself. I would learn a protocol, I'd learn about a remedy and be like, oh, I can help this person with that. Oh, I can help this person. I'm still doing that. It's just now that I'm really turning the lens and realizing, well, what good is it? What good am I to anybody else if I'm not healed? If I'm completely broken and exhausted? What good is this life of service? Who am I saving? How can I even do good work on for the rest of my life if I'm not in wholeness? So even do good can be a distraction. And there's so many people, you see this all over, when we really look in the cancer paradigm. So that's that one. And then finally, here we have a syntropic mindset. If I am looking through this perspective of trying to regenerate more life, I'm never going to spray a pesticide on a crop that some little baby or child or mother or somebody is eating. I'm just never going to do that. I'm not going to spray the weeds at Dubois Park. I mean, I'm not worried about bacteria levels. I'm going to put together a whole presentation because there's some real confusion that goes on with that, and the public health recommendations right now are just really irresponsible in my opinion, and not completely unscientific. But we've watched them. They sprayed the coastlines. They spray the grasses. That a lot of times these allergies that we have when they churn up and cut grass, it's this disturbance of all of the chemicals that are in our natural environments. But the people who are spraying it, we meet them all the time. I mean, everybody laughs at me. I take the kids over and I ask questions. I'm just out of curiosity. What are they spraying for? Why are they spraying? And they're just such nice people, these poor people who are just exposed to all these chemicals all the time. But they're spraying them because they're trying to preserve the native species. And again, like I said, that's a whole other discussion. But when you're not in the context, the zoomed out context of trying to regenerate life, your ways are going to be entropic. They're going to be serving something of separateness and not of wholeness. So what's so exciting to me is that I don't have all the answers. I'm not here saying I have it all figured out, you guys. That's why I'm inviting you here. That's why I invited your kids here, because imagine what we can create. Imagine the possibilities in life when we put on these Syntropy lenses and glasses and we start coming up with solutions that are thought through and evaluated through this other lens that's provable, that's reproducibly, scientifically proven over and over and over, and observable in your own life. You do not need an institutional academic scientist to tell you these things. You can see this for yourself. So that is that. I think I stood on my soapbox a little more than I had planned tonight, but I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I would love to see where you are. Let me just take this off. I'm going to not stop sharing my screen. How do I stop sharing? All right, can you guys see me? All right, take off those mute buttons. Let's hear. What's going on? Any thoughts? Anyone like, Marissa, you're a nut job?
I'll start.
Okay.
So one of the reasons that we wanted you guys to show up to this class is because, and I hesitate to use the word fix, but I'll use it in this context because nobody's really broken. But I tend to, I'll speak for myself. I'm always, or in the past, was always trying to fix my kids, fix their behavior, change what's going on, inform them that this is not acceptable, or force met with counterforce. What we really should be doing, or what I really want to do, is change myself. When I change myself, when I change the way I look at things, the things I look at will change. When I change my behavior, it will be noticed. Nobody, and maybe I'm wrong, but in my house, we didn't talk about politics. It was just a way of being in my house. It was just how my parents were about this or about that. We do this thing, or we talk about those people. And kids, like like Marissa said, from third trimester to 7 is where we're uploading these programs. So, and we are in charge of your kids. We're teaching them a lesson, but what we really want to do with this class is make sure that you guys are on board with the lessons that we're teaching, and that you understand and know them as well, because it doesn't matter what we teach them. They're with us for this many hours of the week, and they're with you for this many hours of the week. In strength training, I can do a bicep curl, half range of motion. I'm not going to walk around with bent arms all day. I'm just going to be weak in the rest of that range of motion. I'll have only trained a short range, because I spend 1 hour a day doing this. I spend 8 hours a day with my arms straight. I'm never going to defeat the 8 hours a day of straight arms with 1 hour of work. So we're never going to defeat these thoughts and patterns with just dealing with our kids. We have to deal with ourselves. We have to do internal work. We have to think about how we want to be, and based on how we are. Somebody close to me, a family member, once was talking about their kids, and she said, I don't know where she gets this from. And I'm like, I know exactly where she gets it from. I know that you don't want me to tell you where she gets it from, because that's going to force somebody to look in a mirror. That's going to force somebody to say, this behavior was caused by me. And I've experienced it very recently in my own house, where I've come to these understandings, or a realization that my boys are behaving in a way that I don't like, but they're behaving in exactly the way that I trained them. Remember, you don't get what you intend, you get what you train. You don't get what you intend, you get what you train. I intend for my kids to have a better life than me, so I'm taking them to this school that will teach them in a way that I wasn't taught. But what I'm training them every day they come home is the way I was trained. And so this lesson at school is not going to defeat the amount of time they spend with you guys. So we're just encouraging you guys to understand these concepts, and maybe take a deeper dive into yourselves. There's nothing wrong with the world. The world is a beautiful, perfect place. Tend to yourselves. Stop trying to fix
Well,
the
and
world.
then right, and we don't want to. We're not like telling you guys what to do. By the way, it's not.
I'm
It's not
telling you.
really about that. That's the invitation, right?
Yes,
Tend to
I'm
yourself.
inviting, of course.
It's an invitation, right? It's just an invitation to realize that it is beautiful that your kids are learning these things. But Soul to Soil is not, it's not a nature school. They're not just learning forest facts and like, ocean marine life stuff, right? Like we're supporting them in a whole experience, socio-emotional rebalancing, and we use their experiences and then this interaction with nature and what we can see in nature to teach these lessons. But like, I mean, Gary and we're constantly in the work. I'll do a lesson, and Lauren, I'm sure, can attest to this too. That we'll have these lessons, and sometimes in the lesson, like something just reveals itself, and it's like I'm using it in my life. I'm totally taking that on. I didn't even know that that was something that was going to be of value, but I happened to be teaching about fire and reactivity, and well, there goes, when I explode into flames when I'm frustrated with my kids and have an unmet expectation. So the the fields of personal development and conscious parenting, I really see like paradigm shifts going on all over the place. But what I love about specifically nature's lens is it like takes you up to that part of the mountain where you can see so clearly so much more. You're looking at the whole thing. You're not just looking at this one part, and we're never meaning to look at it like, Gary used the language of defeat, which I know that that's not what you meant, babe, but we're not really trying to like go to war with ourselves. And certainly, I want to invite you to not like overanalyze or feel shameful, because when I started in personal growth, that was a really big thing for me. Like I just felt like I was so aware of how I was screwing up my kids. Oh my God, it's already done. My oldest was already 7. So there goes him, like that, and then it was just this constant, I can't mess up. But that's the point. That's why I love Syntropy, because everything performs a function with purpose. You have to mess up. That's great. Failure is amazing. That is exactly how you succeed. That's how we tell the perfectionistic students who want to just scribble out their whole thing when it doesn't go their way. We share with them, that's so great, that mess up. That's the stage to create something even more beautiful. So, but definitely bringing home the the sense of responsibility, not guilt. Like guilt and responsibility are, again, two sides of the same coin. That responsibility is a superpower. If I am accountable for my experience, that is awesome, because anything that I don't like, I have the power to shift. But if I'm guilty, if I'm that means I'm judging myself, I did something wrong, there's going to be shame involved. That's completely of entropy. Guilt does not exist in syntropy. That is not a syntropic way of relating. And imagine even what I'm saying about pesticides. I mean, I still, squash bugs here and there. I'm not perfect. I still have plastic containers, and we're and I drove myself crazy trying to be zero waste and non-toxic, and God forbid we ate like a lick of gluten or even grains for a long time. Like, I've been vegan and perfectionistic, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things when we choose them from a loving place. But the syntropic perspective is meant to let you know, look, you are who you are. How you are right now is perfect. The world is exactly what the world is, and the way to change and shift it is to see through your own experience what wants to be shifted, and to be the owner of that choice, the owner of that choice, the driver of the circumstances. And then our kids heal through that. Like, we don't even have to heal them specifically. If we heal, they heal. If we heal, the world heals. But I can't tell you, speaking of public health in my graduate degree, every single one of my classmates was headed into some kind of a non-governmental organization that was a not-for-profit, in some underserved area of the world, or they were doing these beautiful things. They were living a life of service. But I'm going to tell you, most of their character did not match up with their actions. Okay. There was so much hypocrisy. And we were constantly talking about health, and none of them embodied health. None of my professors embodied anything, health wise. It was just this glorification of what and no one living in integrous, anchored, strategic action. Syntropy is a strategy more than anything else. And that's why I wanted to share it, because it allows you to go, I'm in fear right now. I'm in guilt right now. I'm screaming at my kids right now. I'm laying on the guilt trip, which, by the way, still do. Gary and I are still in this. We're still healing. That life is a healing event. We're not meant to just all of a sudden know this and then snap into perfection. That's not the goal. But if you can acknowledge it and then actively evaluate it, bring it in, run it through the lens of syntropy and see what comes out, right? If I don't have to be paranoid, if I look at a sign that says high levels of bacteria at Dubois Park, and then I actually go to the website, I go, how are they collecting this information? Have I contacted them? What information are they collecting? What kind of bacteria are they talking about? When I not that you have to do that, but if you look into the fear and then you go, what do bacteria actually do? Am I sure? Am I sure that they cause disease? Is that a scientifically proven fact, or is that a theory? Which, by the way, theories again are not natural laws. So that's why I'm introducing this to you, because what it had me do is question everything I thought I knew, and thank God, because it's like the experience of life is so much more freeing when I get to take part in it. I get to choose it. I don't have to take on someone's fear tale and make it my own. And I think that also the part that I want to highlight is that being in syntropy doesn't mean just throw caution to the wind. It's still a strategy. It's still like I don't, I wonder actually how many of you guys worry that because I have these really different views about things like bacteria or illness, or all of these different kind of like almost renegade rebellious concepts, how many of you think that I'm cavalier or neglectful? I don't just go, oh, I'm just wild and free, who cares? Like, this is well thought out, right? Like, I study everything. So I just want to make sure you guys know that syntropy is not just life's just happening. I mean, no worries. Like, it's not about that, right? Like, yes, I don't recommend worry, but it's a strategy. It's still an operating system, and it's highly intelligent, and one that you participate in, not one that you just go, like people when they switch to natural health do this. They go, well, I just don't want to use antibiotics. And then they don't really have alternatives, or they go, they don't really know why the antibiotics are so detrimental to the system, so they hop over to herbs that are also antimicrobial. And in essence, even though it's not a synthetic chemical version, it's doing the same havoc. It's wreaking the same havoc on the body. Because there was no shift in consciousness. There was no syntropic processing of, well, what do bacteria do? Do I know that that's what's happening? And that's what I'm saying. I'm using that context because you guys know me and germs. I'm like the microbe mother. But it's just one example, right? You can use this in any aspect of your life. Nutrition, you don't have to make anything wrong or bad to say, well, let me take this on. Is there fear there? Is there guilt there? Is there scarcity? Is there competition? Do I feel like I'm thinking this through from a place of lack? So instead of being in anxiety and worrying about everything, you're just analyzing everything. So you're still busy in your mind, but at least it helps lead you to a place where eventually you'll be able to be confident and peaceful in making an anchored choice. You're not just going to be floating through all these what ifs. Because as I said, with a universe of unlimited potentialities, anything is possible. So I've told certain clients that where they were in such a state of fear and anxiety, where then even where the focus goes, energy flows, that can activate a lot of panic, right? Because now I'm accountable for what I'm thinking and where I'm focusing. And I'm certainly not ever, anytime you're in fear, that is not syntropy. Fear, I heard this acronym that I love. Fear is false evidence appearing real. People will say, well, fear is safe. But when I'm aware of a risk, and I feel the energy of that in my body, where my body's like, don't step any further, that's not going to be good for you. That's an intuitive connection and an awareness. That's not the same as fear. That's very different. Alertness and, panic, or, worry, or let me just make sure I'm smoothing out every single possibility so that this doesn't happen or that doesn't happen. Like, unfortunately, that doesn't actually work out. That's the observer effect. That's the power of adopting this quantum physical view of life, that you get to just sit there with your perspective and go, let me rethink some things. And that's why I'm sharing it. So you guys can just start to do that in your everyday life. And when you come upon a fear, and how many of you guys raised your hand, like learning this from me, those of you who have been my clients, like how many of you have really seen results in adopting this perspective? Yeah, I mean, it really does. It's life changing. Anyone else have a context that comes up? I went through the whole, I am curious, like, what are you guys impassioned by? Like, what's a topic of the moment that you're like, I'm so glad my kids aren't in school because they're teaching this? Or like, what's the hot button issue? I clearly, illness is my jam, but, is it like climate change? Is it, what are the media driven, because again, like climate change, that's not, that's like a media invented term. But like some people will just be a denier of something and be like, well, that's ridiculous, that doesn't exist. But again, that's not actually shifting your perspective and trying to become more in touch with, well, what do I sense that's going around in my natural environment, or that's going on? Because there are always these environmental shifts, and they haven't been great, right? How many people want your living area to turn into a desert? I look at what's it called, Dubai, and I used to glorify living in a city. I was like Miss New York City. I was like, it was the center of the universe. Don't tell me about anywhere else that's better. I went and studied abroad in Florence, and I was so like picky about everything that Europe was this incredibly gorgeous, diverse place, but I was still super elitist about New York, still the best. So I was such a city girl. But now, I mean, it's just that, like, yeah, I look at the city of Dubai, it's just like on sand. There's like hardly any life. You know, like you can't have life in concrete and sand environments. You can if you start putting oxygen, water, and life into it, but that's not what we're doing. We're just building concrete in these areas and bringing in power. So I can appreciate the beauty, you know, in ways of everything, but like those kinds of creations are the opposite of a living system. So yeah, what topics? Drop in the chat. Like, what would you want to talk about next? I really wanted to talk about natural law and rights, and I'm going to loop Marguerite in because, well, I mean, if you don't mind. um, but that's another really big one because that whole concept has helped me. I have two older boys who are just the sibling rivalry just drives me crazy. And it's just that the bickering and the fighting and the competing with one another. I mean, it's like enough to just take my very sensitive sensory nervous system and just drive me to drink, let's face it. So
I definitely
yeah,
looped in on that conversation, but you mean as another evening, right? Because that's a
another evening,
whole
not
thing in
tonight. That's what
itself.
I'm saying, future. So, like, where are we taking this lens? If you guys don't have anything else to contribute tonight, I want to go. Where do you guys want to go with it next? I was going to do stress and overwhelm and schedule and kind of time and talk about what that means about, you know, how that's related to worthiness and worth. And that can really come in to this space during this time of year. But also this idea of the natural law and rights. I mean, we do you'll get to know so much about how we do conflict resolution at Soul to Soil, and it's one of the things I'm definitely going to cover because I can tell you it's totally changed things at home, right, Gary? I mean, it's like I had nothing. Like I read conscious discipline books and I was driving myself crazy trying to figure out what to do. And it was like the simplest teachings that this course that I took that Marguerite told me about, which was not even like a nature-based course, but it was all about natural laws and these laws that are observable that you just when you hear them, you're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Like you don't need anyone to prove it to you. And then once you do, it's so much easier to navigate conflict resolution because humans, we just bring drama. We bring it into our courtrooms. And I'm saying this, both my parents are lawyers. So I've like, I'm a gold medal arguer. So, and so is my oldest son. But that doesn't get anywhere, you know, it doesn't, you know, you just hear a lot of like whining and bickering and then they're fighting and, you know, there have been some really, I could tell some intense stories about that, but there's so much more harmony the more we use these nature-based principles. So if you guys are up for that, let me know next. But I can also send out maybe a little questionnaire to see what we want to do with the topics. But because as we go into the holiday season, I want to talk about guilt. Guilt is a whole other topic. Gratitude versus guilt, and then money is another one that you know I want to see what nature has to say about it because we all learned so much about money when we did water last year because water really tells us about currency.
My phone's about to die though.
That's okay. We're wrapping up. Anybody have any questions?
I do, Marissa.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I'm still stuck on syntropy and what it has to do with invasives. Like, how does that correlate with syntropy? What do you mean by there?
Right. So in the term invasive species is used all over agriculture and even like preservation, and most of our nature preserves and our or food farms, right? Our food system. We use herbicides and pesticides to kill off either insect species, invasive species, or weeds. But what Syntropy would say is there's no such thing as an invasive species. There's nothing invades an environment without that environment on some level inviting it. So when and again, this could be a whole other one because this really correlates with disease. But at Dubois, for example, they spray for invasive species to keep vegetation out of the rocks, to keep it off the coastlines. There's all different stories as to why they do it. But when they're doing it, they're poisoning that natural environment. So they're supposedly protecting the trees that we believe are native to here. Although if you really look into, like, you go deep into the origin of
What's native,
species with
yeah.
snakes, yeah, like everything came from the Americas like thousands of years ago, right? And then they drifted off to the different areas of the world, and now we're the new world again when we were probably the old world, right? So yeah, so if you look at, and actually, oh my gosh, Christina, by the way, you guys, is a horticulturist, so I can't wait to really have this conversation with you. But the way I learned of syntropy originally was in syntropic agroforestry, which is different. It's like taking permaculture and it's going to the next level, because in syntropic agroforestry they only work with mechanisms of nature. And the people who have mastered this, they won't say something is invasive. They'll just look at the function and purpose of what it's performing. So that weed came in for a reason. Is it stabilizing the soil because the soil is so eroded, and one really heavy rain and it's the there'll be just runoff in the soil system, because are its roots keeping that soil in place? Is it bringing in certain minerals, bioavailable minerals? Because there's tons of minerals in sand, right? Sand is made up of mineral compounds, these inorganic compounds, but they're not usable. They can't be actually used to create life. So the plants actually are usually working, certain weeds that can grow in sandy, lifeless soil are actually bringing life back in, because with that plant, once it decomposes, that plant has microbes that are going to start to break it down and actually build organic matter and make living soil. Like when you get fruit flies in your house, like, you don't let those in from outside. Did you guys ever think about that? Like, where do those come from? It's not like you left the door open and the fruit flies come in. Like, put a banana peel in a closed container. It's just like the flies are going to come out. Like, they literally form. Bacteria are so interesting because, and by the way, in a compost, we learned this when the Wormy Queen came to visit us. Earthworms are not eating organic matter. They're eating the bacteria. Bacteria have one primary job. They eat dead, non-functioning things. Mm-hmm. And that's with incredible purpose. So if you have a bacterial infection in your body, that bacteria didn't cause that. That doesn't even make any sense. You can look all over nature, and it doesn't matter what strain of bacteria, which, by the way, bacteria are pleomorphic. So they actually shapeshift. There's no such thing as a difference between, staph and then, enterococci, which, by the way, that's what they're testing at Dubois. They're testing enterococci, which are all over our body and it are actually, when a doctor says, oh, there's good and bad bacteria, which is not something you'll ever find me say, because in Syntropy, there wouldn't be such a thing. Good bacteria are the enterococci. So it's like, and there's all kinds of things when it comes to that particular topic in water contamination, but bacteria specifically are very much like, they get a bad rap like these invasives. If a weed is coming in, you want to look at what it is. The story of, oh, this ornamental plant was brought in and then it took over, that you'll find that all over the world. You guys have heard that before, right? Oh, well, we have this Brazilian pepper plant because some European colonist came and they thought it would be pretty and they had it shipped from this other area, and then it just, now it grows everywhere and you can't get rid of it, right? Well, but why? What is it here for? It's performing a function with purpose. So until you look at that, it's going to be really difficult to resolve it without just constantly killing something.
So yeah. I don't know if we have time for this or if we should do it later, but so for an example, the Lygodium, that's in pine forest, right? It's a vine, it's a fern, and it covers everything. So it will definitely shade out all the pine trees and all the serranoas and everything underground. Syntropically, would it be okay to remove it mechanically if you wouldn't use an herbicide, or everything has a purpose?
Yeah, or you would heal the pines and you would heal the soil that's calling that in. So basically that natural system is trying to choke out those plants because of succession. So Florida is flat not necessarily just because of what people say, that it's just like, it's a platform, right? And it's just raised out of the ocean. It's like, I've seen hills, like Florida can have hills, but we keep poisoning Melaleuca and all these other plants that would fall over and die and create high ground. So like it's very possible that that forest, because nature is not in a rush, it has a plan, but not the same timeline. It doesn't share our timeline. So the hard part is when you're trying to have your food forest and this thing keeps coming in and like cramping your whole design, which is, by the way, we'll talk about that, because I'd love to. I'm not an expert, but I have some theories on how to resolve that with like homeopathically. But yeah, the disease is coming in to take that, whatever that forest that's not doing well, that's saying I'm not thriving here, so that it can decompose and then succeed to the next level. It's called succession. So there's this accumulation phase where they accumulate lots more life, different kinds of weeds and plants, like I think it's called the kudzu. And we were in North Carolina. I mean, these gorgeous cascading vines that were so beautiful, but they're considered invasive, and they spray them because they're going to choke out the native vegetation. But that's the thing. Who says that that's not what that forest system wants? So you either heal what is making that forest system call that in, you help rebalance it, which is why humans are amazing stewards of a space. We don't have to be do-gooders, right? Sacrificing ourselves in service of something, but it is phenomenal when we can use our gifts to work with a forest system and help it restore itself. Because that's not the only solution. That plant, what is it called? The plant that you were just saying?
Lygodium.
Lygodium, right? So that, like, we can do, we can try to fill in what that is doing, and then resolve it. So, but yeah, I can definitely also send you some resources on that. But that's what we're trying to learn. That's what I want the kids to learn too, because imagine the technologies. There's such a need for this. Imagine if Florida were reforested. Like we keep complaining about how hot it is, but where do you see trees and shade and cover? Anywhere, right? Like we keep knocking them down to put up buildings and neighborhoods. And it is just stifling, right? But like grass, the transpiration of grasses and trees cools an area by up to 25 degrees. It could be 25 degrees cooler. Imagine that in a Florida summer if we had forest. So these are reasons why I created this program, Christina, so we can start thinking this way, and then we don't have kids who are susceptible to these like entropic fear stories. And instead, if they're passionate about the context, which I have a feeling my kids unfortunately are not super green thumbed and into it as much as I try to make them, that's okay, right? We all have our place. But like those who are going to be so brilliant, and there's going to be such a need for it. Imagine, because nobody really wants spray on their food, and it's everywhere. It's in our water. Like even when they say that they keep it from, they just spray it around the roots of the plant so it doesn't spread. Come on. One rain and it's everywhere. It evaporates into the air and then it's carried in the wind. So yeah, so that's what I meant by invasive species, that's something that's totally come up with. And one of the things we do at Soul to Soil that Camilo will do with us, right, Lauren, we do this invasive versus invited. So we'll go up to the trees and we have the kids ask, here's a story that some people will say this invaded here, but some people would say, Syntropy would say this was invited. Go ask the tree. And they go sit with them, and then it's amazing. And then they get to tell me, I don't tell them, oh no, these aren't invasive. They do this, right? They come up with, and it's so cute. Most of them go, it was invited. The tree told me it was invited. It's beautiful.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Magda has a question, but I can't see it, Gary. Do you see it? Oh, here it is. Could you give an example from your own life how your life or a particular situation of your life has changed when you adopted the perspective of Syntropy? Yes, beautiful question.
Hang on just a second, Ruth.
Yeah.
Before we move away from invasives, one more thing is just the word alone. Why is kudzu personified? Why does kudzu or this other thing have an agenda? We tend to, it's just the word alone and our own lens. When we hear invasive, now automatically I believe that this thing is waiting around the corner for me. We personified COVID. It's gonna get you. It's waiting around the corner. Stay away. Be careful. So just the lens that we look through, not what's actually happening or what we believe Syntropy would say, but what we were trained to believe when we hear that word. I think it was actually Marguerite. I might have had this discussion with you about anarchy and monarchy and oligarchy. When we hear the word anarchy, it draws up. I ask all my clients this, that they think, oh, rioting and
Chaos.
chaos. Yeah, but that's not what anarchy means. It just means
No.
without rule. There are plenty of indigenous
Actually,
people
not without, it doesn't mean without rule. It means without a ruler, which
without a
is very
ruler.
important
Yeah,
distinction, because there can be rule in nature, obviously, without a single ruler. But that's
without
the
a
thing.
single ruler. So we're trained in
Yeah.
these ways to hear words and automatically have a reaction when
Yeah.
that's just, and that's again one of these over umbrella thoughts that we wanted to get across this weekend, is just to reevaluate when we hear something what we actually think about what that is. The term conspiracy theory was coined by the CIA, not by crazy people. It was coined by the CIA to make other people discredited. So for what it's worth, that's all. You go ahead with Magda's
Yeah.
question.
So, Magda, I love the question, and I could obviously answer with the obvious one, which is disease. That, like, I had a very different experience during the pandemic than a lot of the people that I knew, just because I had already, actually, no, during that time was when I came upon Syntropy, and I felt so alone and separate and very, very fearful that I had been developing a very different perspective on infectious disease from my own experience. Gary and I owned a healthy lifestyle studio called Fitness Redefined in town for almost 15 years. And it was like a research lab, like where a researcher might get to see subjects, really just through a questionnaire a lot of times. But like if they do get the benefit of doing some kind of a controlled trial or an experiment, they get to see subjects for maybe like at the most like a set of weeks. um we were seeing people on a like 3-4 times a week for years. So I got to observe these patterns in illness, and I had a really different perspective on everything. So during the pandemic, I was so fearful. And so I was worried because people would say, like, you can never let your opinion be known because you'll be targeted. And there was just, I would go into my gym when it was closed, and I would be doing research, and then I would like leave and like look around to see if like somebody had seen it was just crazy. I was super, super fearful. Like my phone was listening to me, and like I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be targeted. And but fear doesn't exist in Syntropy. Like that isn't even really a thing. So there was this connection with oneness and with love and with life that neutralized a lot of that and gave me permission to allow myself to express and communicate authentically. And if you guys saw me in a presentation like this, even like 3 years ago, there was such an affectation to how I would speak. I would present myself in this very people pleasy, like almost a different character. People used to come up to me and say that I looked like this actress who was in a movie, and in this movie Pitch Perfect. And they would say it all the time, and I would be like, what are you talking about? Like, she's beautiful, but like thank you, but like she had this way of talking and acting, and I was just like, couldn't for the life of me figure out how I was like her. And then I watched some videos of me speaking, and it was totally inauthentic. So, expression and communication and being honest and owning who you are and trusting yourself, I was not any of those things. I did not live that way. I was in a constant anxiety experience. So I was really into natural healing and supported a lot of other people. But if you felt my muscles, like I'm still undoing the tension of what it was to be in that like armor of anxiety and defense, and knowing that I was one way deep down, that I didn't feel anyone would ever accept, that I was weird, and this is from when I was a kid. So Syntropy was such a lifesaver for me because it freed up my own permission to trust myself and to actually free myself to express. And what happened was I started to freely express with my husband and my children, who I was also constantly accommodating. I was the woman with like 12 arms who was just doing everything, juggling everything, and ready to completely collapse. And it helped me use my voice. And it didn't come out super syntropic at first. I'll tell you, it took some practice to like let that out. But there was this fiery part of me that totally transmuted and transformed. So the biggest life changer for me was this person that you're seeing now. That like the way that I'm talking to you, I would never in my life like think that I would be have presented the ideas in the way that I've owned them with you tonight. And those who are really close to me, like Lauren and Marguerite and Gary, like they've heard me talk like this. My clients who worked with me for years, have heard me talk like this. But I was always afraid. I was afraid of being weird and judged. But that's just not the life that I choose anymore. So I thought to myself, oh my gosh, imagine skipping that whole phase of insecurity and inauthenticity and being able to embody this and role model this to my children. Like, imagine if they can embrace whatever is weird or different or rebellious in their spirit so that they can freely express and trust themselves to make their own choices and not push themselves to do something that they feel violates their own integrity and set of beliefs. So Syntropy in my life, it was really the biggest impact was the authenticity that it gave me permission to express. It was expressing my own inner self and communication.
Thank you. That was a great example.
All right, guys, I know I ran long tonight. Does anybody else have questions? I think we have a vote. Vanessa, you're in on the natural law topic, right? Should we do that one next? Did I see you say that somewhere? Yeah, it's a good one. All right, but like let it ruminate. Let this sink in. Let like think about this, and then just send me messages if there's anything you want to tackle. I mean, we can literally tackle anything in suburban life. I mean, when we talk about natural law, we can get really into even government and relationship with government and how we run our societies and our local culture. One of my interests for a long time has been in creating more local economy. That I would love to see a world where our children, because our children, when we ask them what they want, what they love, what their passions are, some of them still say, I want to be a police officer, I want to be a doctor. And that's cool if that's their passion, but it's still, I want to be something instead of I want to be me in the context of healing others and showing up. Or I want to do my art and do it specifically in a way that educates children. Or I would love to see them, I would love to see more diversity in the economic opportunities in life, so that, and just more support for entrepreneurship. Like I was raised by the way, has anyone seen Elements? I love that the little movie, or no, Elemental. Is it called Elemental? Yeah, but it's really cute. It's like a Disney movie about the elements. But of course, it was really cute to me because I was watching it through the syntropic lens. I also saw Barbie yesterday, which, by the way, that's another change, Magda. I can watch a movie that everybody's freaking out about and talking about all these cultural suggestions and implications, and I can feel I have my own immunity. That one of the things I'll teach your children is that the immune system is not a defense system. It's that membrane that we talked about. It's that interface between our inner selves and our outer world. And I get to determine what flows in, what flows out, and how I choose to interpret and digest it. So, when you're talking about gut health, like the best thing to do is to strengthen your perspective on life, because the gut is one of those interfaces too. That's the immune membrane. But this Elemental movie was really cool because it told the story of immigrants coming in through what they called Element City, but it was supposed to be New York. And then what was the pressure of service and sacrifice that was put on the children of the immigrants to do the family business, or to go to school and become a white collar professional. Like that was very much in my story growing up in New York, that my great grandparents, came through Ellis Island, and then they worked to eventually have their kids work in their business, and then their kids were my parents, who then had to go into some kind of a white collar career because that was the only thing that would have made them proud was you need to go to college. My mom was in the first class of women at her school, and then she went into a field that she absolutely despises to this day. And she's brilliant at it. She's so good at it. But she's an incredibly creative being who doesn't ever give herself permission to do what she loves and never has. And now she raised me with all of these incredible possibilities. But that guilt relationship was still there. So this, like when we talk about economics and natural law, it's so powerful for us to do that, because if we live in service of entropic systems, which are essentially unloving systems, it's just going to be much of the same. Like our children are not necessarily going to be able to walk such a different life, and will miss out on the piece of syntropy that is so hard, but also so incredibly powerful, which is that cooperation and collaboration. That all of us need to walk this ourselves. We need to like heal ourselves. And that's a huge part of this. But then as we are, the reason I'm bringing this community in and I want to invite people onto these calls is so that we're talking about these messages together and we can co-create different systems that are more in line with creativity and natural laws that free us from harm. You know, and there's so much of that in entropic society. There's harm in the name of safety. There's so much of that in medicine, my goodness. Violence in the name of safety and protection. So anyway, that's my intention too in bringing up natural law. That might not just be one of our segments. We might have to do a part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 for that one. All right, guys, I don't want to keep you too long. Any other questions? All right, hopefully this recorded. I'm going to pray. It looks like it is. Oh, did you have something to say, Christina?
No, I just said thank you so much, and I want to say good night to everybody.
Oh, you're so welcome. Good night, everybody. I'm going to send this out in case you want to send it along, or watch it again, watch it back. All right. Take care, guys.